Today we look at another 3 chapters of Genesis, 46 through 48. And these chapters document for us the move of Jacob, Israel, and his descendants from Canaan then to Egypt. There's a dot in the middle of my screen I was looking at, so you won't see it, I'm sure. And chapter 46, starts with, when Israel set out on his journey with all that he had, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And then God spoke to Jacob and said, Jacob, Jacob. So here again we have this reminder that Jacob wrestled with God. God changed his name to Israel, but yet God still refers to him as Jacob. And so sometimes when I'm reading these, I got to think and remind myself that, Israel and Jacob are one and the same person. So God speaks to Jacob, and he calls him by name, Jacob, Jacob. And Jacob responds, here I am. And God says, I am God, the Father, the God of your father. So do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. And I myself will go with you. And so 2 promises. You will be a great nation made in Egypt, and I will go with you. And so Jacob, Israel, sets out from there with his sons and his daughters-in-law and all of their families. And we have, many of their, it says they set out with the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. Because remember that, as Pharaoh was talking to Joseph, he said, and to Joseph's brothers, I will send wagons with you, and I will send provisions for you to help you move. Not knowing what there may be, but Pharaoh wanted, because he was so pleased with everything that Joseph had done, to make this move for Joseph's family, his dad and his brothers and everybody, to be able to come. So they had wagons that were sent from Egypt by Pharaoh. It says they took their livestock and the goods that they had acquired in the land of Canaan and came to Egypt. And then starting verse 8, we have a listing of these names. And verse 26 says, all the persons belonging to Jacob who came to Israel, who were his offspring, were 66, not counting the wives of his sons. And then it mentions Joseph and Joseph's 2 sons, and it says it brings the total to 70. So we need to add Jacob in there as well. So there's 66 descendants plus Joseph, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Jacob, Israel himself. So 70 people, the house of Jacob, who came into Egypt that way. And when they were on their way, then Israel sends son Judah on ahead to Joseph to tell him, well, we're getting here. We're at this land of Goshen. We're going to stay here. So Joseph runs then, or takes his chariot and goes to meet his father. It says he presented himself to his father, fell on his neck, and wept there a good while. And I can totally understand that. When you meet a long-lost friend, or someone that you never expect to see again, or in this case, Israel greeting his son Joseph, whom he thinks is dead, and Joseph, not knowing if his father was still living after this many years, was equally, just so thankful to have this joyous reunion. And so they wept, and Israel says then, I can die now, for I have seen you, my son. And he goes on to live quite a few more years. We'll find that out. But so Joseph tells his father and his brothers that I'm going to go and talk to Pharaoh, and I'm going to tell him that, my family are people of the land. They've been sheep herders. They've been, with the livestock. They are keepers of livestock, and they brought their flocks and their herds. So when Pharaoh calls you and asks you, what is your occupation? Tell him that, we are keepers of livestock. We are shepherds, as our ancestors have been. and then, Pharaoh will allow you to settle in this land of Goshen, where there is evidently still some pasture and feed for these flocks and herds. So, chapter 47, Joseph goes and tells Pharaoh, my father and my brothers are here. And from his brothers, it says he picked 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh and said, and Pharaoh asked, what is your occupation? And they responded as Joseph had prompted them. And Pharaoh says, your father and your brothers have come. The land of Egypt is before you. So settle them and let them live in this land of Goshen. And if you know that there are capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. So look at the trust that Pharaoh has in Joseph. Look at the authority that Pharaoh gives to Joseph. And everything had flourished in Joseph's hand, and they had food and provisions, because of Joseph's ability to interpret the dream. So verse 7, Joseph brings his father Jacob and presents him to Pharaoh, and Jacob, Israel, blesses Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, Pharaoh, they're talking. He says, how many are the years of your life? How old are you? And he responds, 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life. And then we will learn in just a little bit, over in verse 28, that after Jacob died, the total length of his life was 147 years. So he was 130 when he came to Egypt, and 147. So 17 years that Israel lived in Egypt after coming there because of the famine, because of the drought. And the family was established there in this land of Goshen in Egypt. And Israel tells Pharaoh that, the years of my life don't compare with the length of years of my ancestors. And if you remember, you can go back to Genesis 5 and look and see some of the ages of some of the ancestors, Noah and Methuselah and all of those that lived, 500, 600, 700 years. And that's all recorded there. So we have Israel settling in the land of Egypt, the region of Goshen, and they gained possessions and were fruitful and multiplied exceedingly. And then verse 29 of chapter 47, when the time of Israel's death drew near, he called his son Joseph. And he says, don't bury me in Egypt, but when I die, carry me out of Egypt and bury me with my ancestors. And Joseph promises to do that. And then Israel bowed himself on the head of his bed. And then later, Joseph was told, your father is ill. So he took with him then his sons. Joseph did, his sons Manasseh and Ephraim. And, so this is 17 years later that Joseph is bringing his sons, and Israel claims these 2 sons as his own. He says, God Almighty has appeared to me at Luz and said to me, I'm going to make you fruitful. I will make you a company of people, and I will give the land to your offspring for a perpetual holding. Therefore, Israel says to his son Joseph, your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt are now mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon. And so Manasseh is the older and Ephraim is the younger, but Israel, Jacob, uses the first one, the younger one's name first that way. And then he's going to bless these 2 boys. And in the process of the blessing of them, Israel puts his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh. So the blessing with the right hand is of more importance. So the right hand should have been on Manasseh's head because he was the firstborn, the older. And Joseph points that out. And his father, Jacob, Israel, says, no, this is the way it is to be. Manasseh will be great, but the younger Ephraim will be even greater. But the blessing, he blesses Joseph and says, the God whom my ancestors Abraham had walked, this God has been my shepherd, and then the angel who has redeemed me. So Israel refers to God as the Father, the God of my ancestors, the God who has been my shepherd and my angel. And to think about, God looking over us in those same manners as well. So he blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. And then he says, he tells Joseph that, he's getting close to the end of his life. But he says to Joseph, I give you one more portion than to your brothers. So Joseph will get a little bit more inheritance than his brothers from his father that way. And so Joseph has had this conversation with his father, and his sons have received a blessing from their grandfather. And it's just one more of the ways that we see God's faithfulness in to his promise to Isaac, to Abraham, and to the Israelites. And it's a reminder for us that God is always true to his word. That, we read in the New Testament that God is faithful because he can be nothing less. And that's his promise to us, that he is always faithful to us.